Let's take you to Minneapolis with MS Now national reporter David Noriega. We're also joined by our senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, former D.C. Homeland Security and Intel Chief Danelle Harvin, and former federal prosecutor and former lawyer at the DOJ National Security Division, Brendan Ballou. David, what's the latest on the ground there in Minnesota this morning?
Anna, I'm standing right in front of the exact location where Alex Pretti was shot and killed by Border Patrol agents on Saturday. What you see behind me is a shrine, a memorial in his honor. As you see, there's a tremendous amount of flowers, candles, handmade signs. The reaction from the community to this killing has been intensely emotional, mostly from what I've seen, somber, mournful. Yesterday, we saw, I think, smaller crowds coming out to protest this than I and many people expected. Excuse me, Anna. I think that's attributable to a couple of things. First of all, there's less immigration enforcement activity happening, and it's those raids, those arrests that tend to bring people out into the streets. But also some of the folks that I've been talking to who are involved in the local community organizing in response to these immigration enforcement actions have told me that they are scared as a result of this killing and scared as a result of some other intimidation and threatening tactics that they've encountered from the federal government. That said, they're also telling me that there's no intention on their part to let up on the pressure, the public pressure that they're putting on the federal government to leave Minnesota, which is ultimately their desire. Anna.
We know these eyewitness accounts are so important when it comes to these ongoing investigations. David, I know it's really cold there. Thank you for bearing with us for just an extra moment. One eyewitness says they're afraid to go home because of the ICE presence. Tell us more about that account and what you're learning about the investigation this morning.
So, Anna, there was an eyewitness account filed in an affidavit, in a lawsuit filed by ACLU of Minnesota, among others, over alleged violations of protesters and observers' free speech rights. That witness account was provided by a doctor who lives somewhere on this block, and say that this person is anonymous, but they say that they witnessed the killing of Alex Pretti, and they, as a doctor, a pediatrician, tried to render first aid on the scene. They say that initially the federal agents here prevented them from reaching from reaching the body of Alex Pretti. Eventually, this doctor was able to reach him, but was not able, of course, to help the situation in a meaningful sense. What this tells you, among other things, Anna, is that there are a lot of really important concerns around the way that the federal government is handling evidence in this case, and generally how they're handling this investigation. It's hard to overstate how much of what's happening here is far outside of the normal established protocol of what would normally happen here. We have heard directly from DHS that ICE HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, is leading the investigation into this incident. That means DHS is investigating itself. Local and state authorities have been frozen out of the investigation. I spoke to the county attorney here yesterday, who told me that the feds are pretty aggressively preventing her office and state police from investigating this case. They have sued DHS to preserve the evidence. They have also told me, the county attorney made a point of telling me repeatedly, that she maintains the jurisdictional authority to investigate and potentially prosecute these agents, and that they are conducting an investigation based on the publicly available evidence in spite of the alleged obstruction from the federal government, and that if the evidence, the available evidence, leads them to conclude that they have enough evidence to charge these agents, they will do so, Anna.
We'll be talking with that county attorney later this morning. David Noriega, thank you for your great work there in Minneapolis. Lisa, in just a few hours, we're going to see this remarkable hearing meant to ensure the federal government doesn't destroy evidence from the Pretti shooting. Explain how we got here.
Well, Anna, David was just referring to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. That's the Minnesota state agency that gets involved anytime there is a law enforcement related use of force incident. And as they described in the lawsuit that they filed, they tried to get involved at the crime scene in the preservation of evidence, to also be involved, more importantly, in the investigation. And in a declaration that someone with the agency filed, they described being rebuffed by federal agents, not only once when they arrived on the scene, but they came armed with a search warrant from a state court. And even after presenting folks on the ground with DHS with that search warrant, the claim is that the Minnesota state agency responsible for handling these kinds of investigations was told, you are not wanted here. They promptly filed a lawsuit, and over the weekend, they obtained a temporary restraining order that prevents DHS, Border Patrol, and ICE from disposing of or altering any evidence having to do with the case, while the question of who is going to handle this investigation and with what evidence gets resolved by courts, Anna.
Brendan, David explains DHS is leading this investigation into itself. Can this administration be trusted to maintain the chain of custody for key evidence?
Well, certainly it doesn't seem like it. You know, one of the problems that you have here is that ordinarily an investigation at the federal level will be conducted by the FBI and DOJ, perhaps the civil rights criminal section. DHS has said that it's going to conduct its own investigation. But of course, the leaders of DHS and the White House seem to have already prejudged the outcome of that investigation. Stephen Miller called Alex Pretti a domestic terrorist. Greg Bovino said that the victims were the law enforcement officers, not Mr. Pretti. It just seems that it would be hard for any line-level DHS employee to conduct a reasonable investigation if they wanted to do what's right for, the smart thing for their career, given what their leaders have said. I'll also just say very briefly that, one of the things that I find so extraordinary here is that in having to seek the TRO, the temporary restraining order, for DHS to preserve evidence, ordinarily, it would be unquestioned that state and local authorities would cooperate with the feds here, and that the feds would have every interest in preserving the evidence. The fact that the state has so little trust in the federal government right now suggests that they're really treating DHS less as a law enforcement partner and really more how you would treat a criminal organization.
Yeah, Danelle, can you expand on that? Because I'm wondering your reaction to what seems to be an adversarial stance the feds have taken with local officials when it comes to investigating now 2 deadly shootings. How is the interplay supposed to work?
Well, quite frankly, Anna, this is vertically integrated state-sponsored violence, and the state and locals have really pushed back. We've never seen this before. And the reason why I say it's vertically integrated is because at the federal level, they're controlling the narrative, the propaganda. Some of the tweets we've seen are just outlandish, all the way down to the crime scene evidence. And when you don't have access to that, when you don't have accountability, and that's critically important. And so I've never seen this in my 30-year plus career where the state and locals had to sue the federal government to preserve evidence. It means that there is a breakdown of trust and there's a breakdown of collaboration and coordination at the state and federal local level. What the last thing I want to say is the reason why we're here is because Alex Pretti and many others are out there collecting their own evidence. Why? Because the federal authorities that are on the scene conducting these operations don't have body-worn cameras, which is a standard law enforcement item. I had one. I couldn't roll out in the street without it. It's just as important as your firearm. And they don't have BWCs, which cost about $1,000. In a year where DHS has almost a $30 billion with a B dollar budget, almost considering what FEMA has, they don't have body-worn cameras for less than $1,000 is outlandish.
Well, because of so many people out there with their cell phones documenting what is happening, we do have video evidence publicly available right now to understand how things unfold. And I want to piece together the various angles of this deadly shooting. And I'll warn viewers, the footage is disturbing. The interaction starts with Pretti filming the officers interacting with other residents. You can clearly see he's there in the brown. He's holding a phone, nothing else in his hand. Then things escalate when he intervenes to help up a woman who was pushed to the ground. And that's when officers begin using physical force against him. They get him to the ground. They're hitting him. You can see Pretti's arms in front of him this whole time. And watch closely. You'll see one agent actually kind of sprint away from this scuffle with a gun in hand. Moments later, Pretti is shot several times. A source close to the DHS probe tells MS Now that Pretti had a holstered firearm, and agents did retrieve it at some point during the interaction. We know he was legally licensed to carry that firearm. And here's a key moment in the immediate aftermath while agents are searching Pretti's motionless body. Listen to this. I know it's hard to hear, but when we listen closely and replay that over and over again, there at the end, it sounds like one of the officers is asking, where's the gun? Danelle, what do you see in all that footage?
Yeah, so not to get too technical, when you go to the police academy, they go through these type of scenarios. You are trained in how to disarm someone who has a firearm and potentially may be violent. And what happens is that once you detect that there's a firearm on a suspect, the officer that detects that's supposed to say gun, gun, gun. Once you retrieve that gun, you're supposed to also make some type of positive affirmation that I've got the gun or gun retrieved. If that wasn't said, then in that scrum, a law enforcement officer may not have realized that that gun was retrieved. There's also the potential, and we don't know because we don't have the evidence, of an accidental discharge. You'll notice that 2 other federal agents had their guns out. There's a potential for what we call a sympathetic discharge, where their hand is on the trigger. Your hand's not supposed to be on the trigger unless you're ready to shoot, and they've accidentally discharged. Or the person that removed the gun from Alex Pretti accidentally discharged as he ran away. Once you hear a gunshot, a law enforcement officer may think that it's actually the suspect that shot, and that may have contributed to this. We don't know. Once again, this is all speculation because we lack the evidence. And the federal government apparently is blocking that evidence from coming to light for the state and local authorities.